He thought the sounds outside were coyotes, until he found 3 starving children near his barn, chewing on rotten apples. He'd buried his future long ago, but this changed everything. The chewing was soft, almost too soft to catch. Willis Hargrove had spent 20 years alone on his patch of dust and thistle, and by now he could tell a fence rattle from a coyote sneeze. This wasn't no animal. It had rhythm, like teeth gnashing against something that didn't want to be chewed, and it was coming from the side of the barn. He stood at the edge of the porch, rifle in hand, not raised, just held firm. The sun had long since slipped behind the hills, and the breeze carried the kind of cold that sank deeper than just skin, the kind that made a man feel like he'd always been alone. Willis took 2 steps off the porch and paused. There it was again, chewing, wet and desperate like hunger made sound. He moved slow around the barn, careful not to snap the frostbitten grass underfoot. That's when he saw the first one. Small, skinny. Boy no older than 7, maybe 8, crouched beside a sagging bushel crate where last month's apple harvest had gone bad. The child's hands were raw, pink, and shaking as he dug past blackened fruit to find the least rotted pieces. And he was eating them, core and all. Willis didn't speak, couldn't. His throat tightened the way it hadn't since the day he buried his wife and their stillborn daughter 7 winters ago. He thought the boy was alone until movement caught his eye near the hay rake. 2 more. A girl, even younger, perhaps 5, and another boy, barely walking, bundled in what looked like stitched-together potato sacks. The girl saw him first. She froze, an apple half raised to her lips. Her face was dirt-streaked, hair tangled with hay, but it was her eyes, round, frightened, and already bracing for pain, that punched the breath out of him. "Don't run," he said low. None of them moved. It wasn't trust. It was worse. It was surrender. The girl set the apple down and slowly stood in front of the 2 boys like a wall made of matchsticks. "We're sorry," she whispered. "He's real hungry. We'll leave." Willis dropped to one knee, lowering the rifle to the ground. "You from town?" No answer. He nodded slowly. "Didn't think so. I know every soul there and no one's seen kids like you around." The older boy choked suddenly, like the apple had caught wrong in his throat. He leaned forward and coughed until tears spilled from his eyes, but he never let go of the fruit. The girl rubbed his back, her own lips trembling. Willis looked toward the dark horizon. No sign of a wagon, no adult, no shelter, just frost on their clothes and desperation in their bones. "You eaten anything today 'cept that?" he asked. The girl shook her head. "Yesterday neither." "You got folks?" Her chin dropped. "Mama died 3 nights back. She said to stay where the cows are 'cause barns mean people. We didn't mean no harm." Willis didn't move right away. His mind spun. He'd spent 7 years building a life of silence. No voices, no joy, no pain. Just chores, woodcutting, fence mending, and the occasional prayer to a sky he wasn't sure still listened. He couldn't remember the last time someone looked at him the way the smallest boy was looking now. Eyes wide, clinging to the fabric of hope the way he clung to that frost-crusted apple. "What's your name?" he asked the girl. "Myra." He looked to the boys, them. The older one wiped his mouth. "I'm Theo. He's Jody. He don't talk much." "Why'd your ma say stay near barns?" "She said good men live near barns," Mara whispered. The wind blew then, cutting through his coat. Willis could have sworn something cracked in his chest. "You kids warm in them rags." All 3 shook their heads. He stood slowly, bones groaning from years of sorrow labor. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you inside." They didn't move. "I ain't gonna hurt you. You'll sleep warm tonight. You'll eat too." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Why would you help us?" He knelt again, lowering himself until his face was near hers. "Because someone once saved me, long time ago, and I didn't have the sense to hold on to them. Maybe this time I can do better." Inside, the fire was already low but still burning. Willis cleared the bench nearest the hearth and fetched the stew pot. It hadn't been touched since yesterday, but there was enough. He didn't say much as he ladled food into bowls and handed it over. The children didn't ask what kind it was. They just ate. Theo fell asleep sitting up, his head bobbing until it settled on the table. Jody curled into Mara's side, thumb in his mouth. Willis watched them for a long time, sitting on the opposite end of the room, not even pretending to eat. "I don't got much," he said finally. Mara looked up. "I ain't rich, ain't even got much land worth claiming, but I got this roof, and food and work. There's always work." "Work?" He nodded. "Enough to keep your hands busy and your bellies fed." "You mean you'd let us stay?" "I mean I ain't about to toss 3 kids back into the frost." Mara didn't cry. She didn't even smile. She just looked at the sleeping forms of her brothers and nodded once. "I can help," she said. "We all can. I know how to feed chickens and scrub pots. Theo can fix things, even doors. Jody can't do much yet, but he don't cry too much." Willis managed the smallest smile. His face had remembered how to make. "You'll stay tonight. We'll see what tomorrow brings." The girl hesitated before curling her arms around the littlest boy. That night Willis didn't sleep. He sat in the rocking chair by the door with the rifle resting across his lap, not out of fear they'd run, but because for the first time in years, something in his house was fragile enough to protect. He didn't know what they'd do next. He didn't know who those kids had run from or if someone was looking, but he knew one thing. He'd bury anyone who tried to take them. The morning broke slow and gray, the kind of sky that made you wonder if the sun had simply given up. But inside the cabin, something new stirred, a fragile thing not quite named hope, but not far from it. Willis Hargrove didn't open his eyes when the floorboards creaked. He already knew the sound. It wasn't mice or wind or cold settling in the walls. It was the weight of bare feet, small feet, cautious feet, crossing a room they didn't yet believe was theirs. He listened as a chair scraped and tiny hands fumbled with the hearth. The kettle was too heavy for her. The groan of metal against stone gave that away. "You want help with that?" Mara jumped, her voice cracked a little. "Didn't mean to wake you." Willis opened one eye, didn't sleep. The girl crouched near the fire. "Water's low. I thought I could heat some, maybe make oats." "You even know how to cook oats?" "I watched Mama. I think I remember." Willis stood slowly, joints aching from the cold and from years of refusing to let anyone share his space. He crossed the room, took the kettle from her, and filled it at the pump by the door. When he returned, she was stirring coals with a stick, her little brow furrowed with the seriousness of her mission. Theo stirred next, then Jody, who woke with a cough that seemed to rattle all the way from his ribs. His thumb went back to his mouth, and he stared around the cabin like it still might vanish if he blinked too long. "Where Ma?" Jody mumbled. Mara's shoulders stiffened. She didn't answer. Willis poured water into the pot and added oats. "She's with the Lord," he said gently, "but you're safe here." Jody didn't speak again. He crawled to his sister's side and sat with his arms around her leg like a root. By the time the oats were done, the fire had grown steady. Willis handed out wooden bowls, filling them more than he ever used to. The children didn't wait for blessing or permission. They ate with quiet desperation, as if any moment it might be taken back. "You remember where you came from?" Willis asked once spoons scraped empty wood. Theo nodded. "Used to live on a ranch, big place with white fences. Then Mama got sick. The man told us to leave when she couldn't work no more." Willis' jaw tensed. "What man?" "Mr. Holler. He said we was charity too long." "Where's this ranch?" Theo hesitated, looking at Mara. "Don't matter," Mara said quickly. "We ain't going back." "Didn't ask if you were," Willis said. "I asked where it is." "East, past the dry creek and the orchard." Willis knew the place. Big spread owned by Elmore Holler. mean as a snake always had been, claimed he was a God-fearing man but didn't even bury his own livestock if they broke down, just left them to rot. If he'd turned these kids out with nothing, not even shoes for the youngest, he'd answered for that before the Lord soon enough. "I'll ride out that way later," Willis said. Mara's eyes flared. "Why?" "Just to ask questions." "Please don't if he finds us." "He won't, and even if he did, he'd never find you here." They worked through the morning. Willis taught them where the chicken feed was kept and how to scatter it without wasting. Thea helped split kindling, weak arms straining but determined. Mara scrubbed the pans from last night and even swept the front steps without being asked. Jody followed them all, clinging, watching, unsure of his role but needing to be near. Around midday, Willis hitched the mule and left. "I'll be back before sundown," he told Mara. "You don't open the door unless you hear 3 knocks, hear me?" "Yes, sir." "And keep the fire going." Mara stood on the porch and watched him disappear down the road. She stood there a long time after he vanished. Willis rode fast, faster than usual. Anger boiled just beneath the quiet surface he'd worn for years. If he'd learned one thing from loss, it was how much of it came from men who called themselves good but turned away when it counted. When he arrived at Holler's ranch, the man was standing on his porch sipping something from a tin cup. His gut strained against his vest, and his smile was too wide to mean anything kind. "Well, well, if it ain't the Hermit of Red Hollow." Willis didn't dismount. "Heard you let some children go, said they weren't your problem anymore." "They ain't. One of them was sick." "Not my concern. Their ma died. They don't belong to nobody." Willis' eyes narrowed. "You didn't bury her." "She ain't died on my land." "You chased her off sick and starving." "She left, I didn't raise a hand. I said go and she went." "You think God don't count that as cruelty?" Holler's grin slipped. "You threatening me, Hargrove?" "I'm telling you to forget their names, their faces, and every step they ever took on your soil. You look for them again, and I'll come back with more than words." "You hiding them?" Willis turned the mule. "No, they're hiding me." By the time he made it home, dusk had begun to settle. Smoke curled from the chimney. Warm light flickered behind the shutters. When he opened the door with 3 knocks, he heard giggling from inside. It stopped the second he stepped in. Mara stood by the hearth, broom in hand. Theo peeked from behind a curtain. Jody clung to Willis' leg. "You came back," the boy whispered. Willis bent and scooped him up. "I said I would." Jody leaned into his chest like he'd found his forever spot. Dinner that night was quiet but not sad. It was tired and full and safe. Before bed, Mara approached him, fidgeting with her sleeves. "Mr. Hargrove." "Yes." "We can call you Mr. But Jody, he doesn't have a name for someone who takes care of him. He keeps trying to call you something." Willis blinked. She looked down. "He said it earlier, I didn't correct him. I hope that's okay." "What'd he call me?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He said Papa." Willis didn't speak. His throat burned too hot to let the words out. "You don't have to let him, I can." "It's fine," he rasped. She nodded and stepped away. But long after the children slept, he sat at the table, staring into the dark, the name echoing in his ears. Papa. A word he thought had died with his wife. A word he'd buried alongside too many dreams. Now it had come back on the lips of a child not his own. And he didn't feel broken anymore. The next morning, Willis found himself standing by the stove before the sun even rose. He stirred the pot of cornmeal slowly, careful not to let it burn, while the weight of that single word still circled his mind. Papa. He hadn't spoken of it again to Mara, and she hadn't brought it up either, but it lingered like a quiet promise stitched into the air between them. Jody hadn't said it again out loud, but each time he reached for Willis' hand or pressed against his side like a puppy afraid of the dark. It was like he didn't have to. By the time the cabin warmed, the children woke one by one. Jody rubbed his eyes and crawled out from under the wool blanket Willis had added the night before, his small voice soft and scratchy. "It smells like Mama's breakfast." Willis smiled without turning. "It's just mush, but it'll stick to your bones." Theo came next, always the quiet one until he had to speak, always watching. Mara and Theo shared glances the way soldiers did in battle, subtle, firm, understanding. Theo didn't ask about Holler, but he glanced at Willis longer that morning, as if to figure out what the man had done on their behalf. Breakfast was slow, and though no one said it, they all felt the change. That day, Willis didn't go to the barn alone. He let Theo follow him into the field, handed him a smaller pitchfork, and let him pretend to help pile hay. When the chickens needed fresh bedding, Mara swept the coop, coughing from the dust but never once complaining. Jody stayed near the fence, chasing shadows and pretending his stick was a horse, a broom, then a sword. By noon, Willis had built a small bench outside the cabin so the boy could rest while keeping his eyes on the rest of them. And every now and then, when Jody got tired, he simply padded up to Willis and leaned against his side, quiet and content. They had no fancy toys, no store-bought sweets or bright-colored fabrics, but for the first time in what felt like years, Willis' home was full of sound, of life, of breath, of laughter, not loud, not wild, but steady, like the sound of a windmill working again after years of rust. In the late afternoon, Mara found a locket in a drawer that hadn't been opened in years. She turned it over in her palm and opened it slowly. Inside was a tiny picture, grainy and faded, of a woman in a bonnet and a wide smile. She showed it to Willis. "Your wife." He nodded, slow and heavy. "Her name was Ruth. She's real pretty." She was kind, gentle, the kind that listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, you didn't forget it. Mara closed the locket carefully. She'd have liked having children in here again. Willis gave a low chuckle. She would have had you all helping her make cornbread and folding laundry by now. They sat in silence for a while, Mara still holding the locket, as if the woman inside it had become someone she wished she'd met. Later that night, when the wind picked up and the cabin creaked, Jody cried out in his sleep. Willis was already on his feet before the second cry. He reached the small bedroll and found the boy tangled in the blanket, shaking. "I dreamed the man came," Jody whimpered. "The one with the red boots." Willis knelt beside him. "Ain't no one getting in here." "But he had a rope. He said I wasn't yours, said I had to go back." Willis gathered him up. "Listen to me, Jody. No one's taking you from me. No boots, no ropes, no bad dreams." Jody's voice was barely a whisper. "You promise?" "I promise. Even if I get sick like Mama." Willis' heart clenched, even then. The boy didn't reply. He just rested his head against Willis' chest and listened to the heartbeat inside it. Later, as Willis tucked the boy back into bed, he found himself thinking not of the sorrow of the past, but the strange and unexpected beauty of the present. The next day brought a stranger to the fence. It happened during chores. Mara was helping stir laundry in a pot outside. Theo was helping Willis haul water from the well. Jody was drawing on the dirt with a stick, scribbling crooked lines that only made sense to him. Then came the voice. "Hey there, houseman." Willis turned slowly, shielding his eyes from the sun. A man on horseback leaned against the rail of the fence, his hat tilted, a smirk on his lips. Dust clung to his boots and coat. Willis stepped forward cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Name's Russ Kelter, from town. I'm looking for some kids that ran off a while back. Orphans. Belonged to a woman named Edith. Heard they might be out this way." Myra froze. Willis didn't blink. "I don't know any Edith." Kelter clicked his tongue. "Well, she died, but the kids, folks say they're living out here. You'd know them if you saw them. One's always coughing. Girl's got hair like fire. Willis looked straight at him. Ain't seen any. Kelter smirked. Funny. The preacher says you've been common to town more, buying more flour, sugar, supplies, said you've got mouths to feed. Willis didn't flinch. I also got neighbors. I stock up for folks that don't have wagons. Well, you let me know if you spot them, Kelter said. Could be someone looking for a reward. He turned his horse and began to ride off, but Willis called after him. You tell whoever's asking to leave MB. Kelter looked over his shoulder. Why would I do that? Because anyone comes past that fence uninvited again won't walk away as easy as you just did. Kelter's grin faded. He kicked the horse and didn't look back. That night Mara packed their things. You don't have to go, Willis told her. They'll come back. I'll be ready. You don't understand. If they take Jody, he won't survive it again. He barely survived the first time. Willis stepped close. You're not leaving. I won't let them hurt him. And I won't let them touch either of you. Theo stood in the doorway, jaw clenched. Willis saw the fear, the instinct to run. He turned to the fireplace and reached up to the mantel. He pulled down a small box. From it, he retrieved something wrapped in cloth. Inside was a badge, old, scratched, dulled with age. Theo's eyes widened. You were a lawman. Long time ago, before Ruth got sick, I put it down to take care of her. Mara blinked. Why show us that? Because the law knows me, and if they try anything, I've got friends still wearing that badge who will back me. But what if that man comes back? Willis closed the box. Then he'll wish he hadn't. They didn't speak after that. The night stretched on, thick with worry. But for the first time, the worry didn't feel helpless. It felt like the kind of worry you face with someone together. And before Jody drifted off that night, he reached for Willis again, curled small against him, and whispered through a sleepy yawn. Love you, Papa. Willis didn't sleep at all. But his heart, which once had felt so empty, now beat so full it ached. By the time morning came, the storm was already building. Not the kind that brought rain or snow, but the kind you could feel in your bones before it ever showed up, quiet tension in the air, a sharp edge to the breeze, the animals restless without cause. Willis knew the signs. Trouble was coming. He stayed close to the cabin that day. He let the chickens roam, the horses rest, and kept his eyes on the trail that led from the main road. Mara tried to pretend it was a normal day, sweeping the front step, making cornbread, playing little clapping games with Jody when she thought no one was watching, but her eyes flicked toward the woods every few minutes. Theo never left the porch. His shoulders were tight, like he was waiting for something to happen. By noon, Willis had posted his rifle just inside the door. Not loaded, not aimed, but present. Then came the first sign. Ahead. It peeked over the crest of the hill, slow, deliberate, followed by a broad chest, a dusty duster, and a pair of red boots. Jody saw them first. He dropped the stick he was pretending was a fishing rod and pointed. Mama! Mara's heart dropped. Willis stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. The man came closer now, just past the fence, stopping where the barn's shadow stretched across the grass. You lost? Willis asked. The man grinned. Not quite. I was told to come find what belongs to the county. 3 runaways, scrawny little things. Heard they was hanging around this place. They ain't here. The man chuckled. Funny, because you're feeding 3 more mouths than before. That's got folks in town asking questions. Willis stepped closer. And now I'm telling you to turn around. You really think you can stand between the law and a debt owed? What law? Willis shot back. The kind that chains orphans because their mother couldn't pay her landlord, or the kind that watches kids starve while the preacher counts silver from the collection plate. The man spat on the dirt. I don't care about the law, I care about what I'm owed. And what's that? Payment for 3 mouths. That's how the orphanage works, old man. Willis tilted his head. They ain't in any orphanage, never were, just a jail with a choir. The man smiled, wide and bitter. Then you won't mind if I come in and look for myself. He took one step. Willis raised the rifle. Try. The man paused, eyes narrowed. I know your type, he said. Washed up, lonely, trying to play family with other folks' kids, but it never works. You'll be the one left bleeding when the dust settles. Willis didn't blink. I already buried a wife. I've got no fear left in me. Silence stretched between them. Then the man grinned again, backed away and tipped his hat. All right, you win this round, but the county doesn't forget. I'll be back with papers. Willis waited until he disappeared over the hill. Then he turned, walked back into the house and locked the door. Jody's face was pale. Mara held him tight. Theo stood near the window, watching. We're not safe, are we? Theo asked. No, Willis said, but we're not helpless either. That evening, he took them all into the barn and showed them a secret most men wouldn't share. In the far corner, under a floorboard, he lifted a plank and revealed a hollow space. Inside were tins of food, a canteen, matches, and a map. If anything ever happens to me, he said, and someone comes, you take this, head to this point. He pointed at a small red X on the map. That's where my friend lives, Amos. He was a marshal, he'll take you in. Myra didn't argue. Theo nodded once. Jody simply hugged Willis' leg. But none of them wanted to imagine a world without him. The next few days passed like breath held under water. They worked quietly, spoke softly, slept lightly. Willis made sure the wagon was repaired, the pantry stocked, and the barn doors could be barred from the inside. They waited. And when nothing came, the stillness grew louder than any threat. Until one night, long after dark, the silence broke. 3 riders, no lanterns, no whistles, just hoofbeats and the hiss of leather as they dismounted in the black. Willis had been waiting. He had the children and Mara tucked away in the root cellar, the trapdoor hidden beneath the kitchen rug. He sat at the table, the rifle laid across his lap, a Bible open in front of him. There came a knock. He didn't answer. The door creaked open anyway. 3 men stepped in. One held a torch. The other 2 had ropes and cuffs. Willis didn't move. You're harboring stolen property, the leader said. They're children. They're county assets. Willis lifted his eyes slowly. You're monsters. The man smirked. Doesn't matter what you think. They're worth more in workhouses than dead in the woods. One of the men started toward the pantry. Willis stood. Don't. They all turned. I said don't, Willis repeated. They ain't in there anyway. He pointed to the table. But I got something for you. Sit down. The men laughed. Sit what for? Willis didn't smile. Because I want you to see it. What happens when a man's had enough? The leader sneered. You gonna preach at us, preacher? No, Willis said. I'm gonna buy them. Silence fell. Excuse me. You said they were assets, property, so I'm buying them. He tossed a small sack onto the table. It hit with a solid thump. 10 gold coins. That's more than you'll ever get for them anywhere else. The men exchanged glances. One reached for the bag and opened it. Sure enough, real gold. Old but genuine. Where'd you get this? Saved it for something that mattered. The leader eyed him. You think this changes anything? I think it buys freedom. Freedom ain't for sale. Willis stood taller. Everything's for sale to men like you. The leader stared long and hard at him. Then he took the bag. We never saw you, never saw the kids. You keep your mouth shut and so will we. They backed out, one by one. They never looked behind them, and they didn't know Willis had his hand near the trigger the whole time. The door shut. He bolted it, went to the cellar, lifted the rug. They came out slowly, Jody first, then Mara, eyes wide and wet, Theo grim. Mara touched Willis' shoulder. "What did you do?" He shook his head. "I did what had to be done." "That was all your savings?" He nodded. "Everything. All I had." She looked down. "Why?" she asked. Willis didn't speak right away. Then he looked at Jody. "Because the first time I heard someone call me Papa, I didn't know how much I needed it." He knelt in front of the boy. "You still mean it?" Jody nodded, quiet and fast. Willis looked at Mara. "I know I can't replace him, your husband, but I can protect you, and if you'd let me, I'd like to." She didn't answer, but the way she reached for his hand and didn't let go, that was answer enough. That night, for the first time, the door was locked not out of fear, but to keep something precious inside. And across the yard, in the sky so wide and dark, a single star burned brighter than the rest. They had no last name, no paper that said family. But they had something stronger. And it was just getting started. The days that followed weren't peaceful, not in the quiet, lazy sense of the word, but they were sacred. The kind of peace that's carved out of chaos with bare hands and stubborn hope. Willis rose earlier than ever before, not because the chores demanded it, but because he wanted to hear the soft rhythm of Jody's breathing before the boy woke. Wanted to see Theo already dressed and sweeping the porch, not because he was told to, but because he wanted to be useful. And Mara, she didn't have to ask anymore. She moved through the house like someone who belonged, like someone rebuilding, one meal and one tucked blanket at a time. It was in those small moments, those unspoken gestures, that the new family forged something still strong and tender. But the town hadn't forgotten. 3 days after the night the men had taken the gold and left, Willis rode into town for feed and nails. He didn't want to. He knew eyes would be watching, but he had to make sure no one else came sniffing around the cabin. He left Mara and the boys behind, locking the gates and leaving them with the rifle. When he stepped into the general store, the room went quiet. Miss Tansy, who always kept a polite smile on her face, gave a curt nod and disappeared into the back. Eli, the smith's oldest son, leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "You feeding ghosts out there, Willis?" Willis didn't answer. "You've been buying more sugar than usual, more flour. Someone got a sweet tooth, or you hiding folks you ain't supposed to." Willis set his list down. "Just stocking up, that a problem?" Eli smirked. "Depends on who you ask." The town had always tolerated Willis. Barely. A widower, quiet, infertile, and uninterested in politics or church gossip, he was an easy target. But no one had expected him to fight for beggars, especially not after all he'd lost, and certainly not after all the town had already made clear about what kind of people belonged. "You hear about those county men?" Eli asked casually. Willis met his eyes. "Heard they went out to collect some runaways. Didn't come back with nothing." "They took payment," Willis said. "Yeah, from who?" Willis didn't flinch. "Me." Eli laughed cold. "You trying to adopt stray dogs now?" "No," Willis said. "Trying to stop the rest of you from losing what little humanity you got left." That shut Eli up. For a while. Willis paid, loaded the wagon, and rode home. But by then he knew the town was talking again. The storm hadn't passed. It had just circled back around. That night, Mara lit a lantern and joined Willis on the porch. The boys were already asleep inside, piled together like puppies under the quilt she'd stitched from spare fabric. "You shouldn't go back there alone again," she said softly. Willis nodded. "I won't." She hesitated, then sat beside him. "I want to believe this is real," she said. "It is." But I can't help waiting for the knock at the door, the shout in the woods. He didn't sugarcoat it. We might hear both. She looked down at her hands. I'm tired of running. Willis glanced at her. Then stay. Her eyes filled. We don't have to be what they say, he added. We don't have to be broken. Myra touched his arm. You already gave everything. Not everything, Willis said. Not yet. The knock came 2 nights later. But it wasn't from a stranger. It was from someone Willis hadn't seen in years. Abe Madden. Tall, sharp-eyed former sheriff. Now a wanderer and, as Willis remembered him, one of the last decent men he ever knew in uniform. Abe didn't wait to be invited in. He stepped inside, shut the door, and looked around. His eyes swept the hearth, the kitchen, the extra boots by the door. Tell me it ain't true, he said. Willis folded his arms. What? That you paid gold to buy back people who should have never been taken. It's true. Abe sighed. And that you're housing them, feeding them. Willis didn't speak. I ain't here on the town's behalf, Abe added. I'm here because I wanted to warn you. About the new sheriff, Barnes. He's worse than the last one. Proud, petty, and he's already sniffing around about those 3 kids. Willis felt his stomach twist. They're not his concern, he said. No, Abe agreed. But he thinks they are, thinks they're criminals, vagabonds. He wants to make an example. Willis looked toward the back room, where the boys were sleeping. Then what do I do? Abe met his eyes. You get ready to run, or you get ready to fight. The next day was heavy with tension. Willis didn't go into town. He packed the essentials, canned food, water, the rifle, spare boots. Mara taught Theo how to spot trails from the tree line. Jody practiced tying knots. Little Ben was too young to understand what was happening, but he clung to Willis like a shadow. And that night, when the fire was low and the door was bolted, they heard hoofbeats. More than 3 this time. 6 at least. Torches flickered in the dark. Voices male loud. Then the shout. Willis Rourke come out. Willis opened the door slowly, stepped out onto the porch. Sheriff Barnes stood at the front of the group, hands on his hips. You've been harboring fugitives. They're children. They're property of the state. No, they're mine now. That set off a round of murmurs from the men behind the sheriff. Willis, Barnes said, voice hardening, step aside. Let us search the place. No. Barnes sneered. You really gonna throw your life away for some gutter-born rats? They call me Papa, Willis said. And that silence hit harder than a gunshot. Barnes stepped forward, last chance. Willis didn't move. All right, Barnes said, have it your way. He raised his hand. And the first man moved toward the house. That was when Theo stepped outside. He stood beside Willis. Then Mara. Then little Jody, clutching the hem of Willis' coat. We ain't scared of you, Theo said. Barnes blinked. What's this now? We're a family, Mara said, voice shaking but firm. You touch one of us, Theo added, you touch all of us. Barnes hesitated. Then one of his own men whispered something in his ear, something urgent. Barnes stiffened and looked past Willis. There, just beyond the fence, stood a second group of riders. Not town men, not sheriff's men, but folks who owed Willis debts, old ranch hands, outlaws with hearts better than reputations, neighbors who'd once borrowed tools and never forgot the kindness. They weren't family by blood, but they'd shown up, and they were armed. Barnes swallowed. You threatening me? No, Willis said, you threatened us. And with that, Barnes backed off. Fine, you win for now. He rode away. But everyone knew it wasn't over. That night Willis sat on the porch, Jody asleep in his lap. He looked at Mara. "You still scared?" "Yes," she admitted. "But I think for the first time, I know we won't run." Willis nodded. Neither would he. Because sometimes, all a broken man needs is for one small voice to call him Papa. And everything changes. They didn't sleep much that night. Not out of fear, though it hovered, but out of something deeper, heavier. A strange mixture of vigilance and belonging. Jody curled up against Willis's side, small hands buried beneath the folds of the older man's shirt, as if anchoring himself to the only thing in this world that had ever felt steady. Inside, Theo kept one eye open despite Mara's soft orders to rest. The boy was 11, but the way he paced the house with the broken pistol Willis had given him made him seem much older. He wasn't scared anymore. Not of men. Not of voices. Not of laws written by those who'd never had to beg for bread or sleep on cold dirt with an empty stomach. They were still here, still breathing, still a family. That meant something now. By sunrise, the horse prints had faded from the dirt outside their home, but Mara saw something that made her jaw tighten. A stake driven into the ground at the edge of the property, where the town's land met Willis's ranch. A sign nailed into it. One word, all in crude red ink. Trespassers. It wasn't a threat in the usual sense. It was a warning, a line drawn by a sheriff who hadn't gotten his way. Willis pulled the sign up without a word, snapped the stake in two and tossed it into the firewood pile. He didn't look angry. He looked resolved. But that didn't mean peace. 2 days later, the local preacher came. He wasn't invited, didn't smile when he stepped off his mule and into the clearing where the house stood. He had papers in his hand, and a tightness in his jaw. "Mr. Rourke," he said, tipping his hat, though his tone lacked any warmth. Willis didn't offer him a chair. "Reverend Miles." "I came to speak plainly." "You always do." The Reverend held out the papers. "A petition," he said, "from the town, signed by over 30 residents." Willis took it, glanced over the names, many of them familiar, some neighbors, some he'd helped repair fences for, all of them now united in cowardice. "What's it say?" Mara asked from behind the doorway. "That we've disturbed the peace," Willis answered. "That the children are under unlawful care. That I've welcomed a woman of questionable background and harboring minors not of my blood." He let the paper drop to the porch floor. "I see." The Reverend sighed. "You've always been a man of principle. We respected that." "You mean you tolerated me until I got in your way?" "I'm not here to fight you, Willis. I'm here to tell you, if you don't bring those children to the county courthouse by end of week, the sheriff will come. And this time he'll bring more than words." Willis's jaw worked, but he didn't yell, didn't snap. Instead, he said, "You preach the book every Sunday, which part of it says we should throw out the hungry and mock the fatherless." Reverend Miles didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the boys peeking through the window. Then he turned and rode away. That evening, Mara stood by the window long after the sun dipped behind the hills. Theo and Jody were sleeping, huddled beside Ben, who had a cough that had grown worse through the afternoon. Mara kept soaking cloths to place on his forehead, whispering prayers beneath her breath. Willis stayed outside, sharpening tools in the fading light. His hands moved steadily like they had purpose, but his mind had drifted elsewhere. The Reverend's words haunted him. The paper with signatures still lay where he dropped it, dirt clinging to its corners. By the time he walked back inside, the baby's breathing had changed. Shallow, tight, each wheeze like sandpaper on lungs. "He needs medicine," Mara said. "I know. But the town's doctor won't give it to us." "I know." She looked at him, her eyes were sharp, wet, exhausted. "Then what do we do, Willis?" He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, quietly, he said, We go to Ruthie. Mara blinked. Who's Ruthie? A healer. Lives past the river bend. Used to be a midwife till they ran her off for using herbs and not prayers. She's that far out. Half a day's ride, but she won't turn us away, not if I ask. He left at dawn. Didn't say goodbye to the boys. Didn't wake them. Just whispered something to Mara, squeezed her hand, then rode out before the sun broke the frost off the grass. He wasn't a man who liked asking for help. But he wasn't a man who would let a child die under his roof, either. Especially not a boy who'd started calling him Papa, in whispers when he thought no one was listening. Back at the ranch, Mara kept the stove hot and water boiling. Theo fetched logs and kept the rifle loaded. Jody stayed by his little brother's side, holding Ben's hand even when the baby whimpered in his fevered sleep. They didn't talk about the town. They didn't talk about the preacher's threat. They just waited. But someone else came before Willis returned. It was near dusk when hoofbeats thundered again. Mara opened the door slowly, shotgun in hand. Sheriff Barnes wasn't alone this time. He brought 5 deputies. One of them was Eli, the smith's boy. "Evenin'," Barnes said, dismounting. "We gave you time." "We need more," Mara said. "No, you're out." He held up a warrant, signed by a county judge. "This says we remove the children, by force if necessary." "You'll have to step over my body," she said. Barnes chuckled. "I was hoppin' you'd say that." The first deputy stepped forward. Mara cocked the shotgun. "Where's Rourke?" Barnes asked. "Gone." "Good, won't have to shoot him then." But before the man could take another step, Theo was out the door, standing beside Mara, then Jody, trembling but holding a knife in his little hand. Barnes raised his hand. "All right, take." He didn't finish, because in the next instant, someone else rode in from the trees. Fast, covered in mud, hat low over his eyes. Willis. And he wasn't alone. Behind him came a wagon, driven by a woman with wild gray hair and eyes like glass, Ruthie. She held up a bundle in her arms and shouted, "You try to take that baby from me and I'll curse every last one of you." Barnes blinked. "What?" "She's a midwife," Mara called out. "She's here to treat the baby." "He's dying," Willis added, sliding off his horse. "You want to arrest me, fine, but let the boy live first." Barnes hesitated. Then Ruthie walked forward, fearless, straight to the porch. "I'll be inside," she said. And no one dared stop her. The night passed slowly. Ben's fever broke just before midnight. He was still weak, still barely breathing, but Ruthie said he'd live. Myra wept in the corner. Willis stood silently beside her. The sheriff had left, grumbling, furious, but not willing to storm a cabin full of women and children and one stubborn rancher with a rifle and a dying child. For now they had time. Not much, but enough. The next morning, Theo climbed onto the porch with a tin cup in his hand. He sat beside Willis, quiet. Then he said, "You scared?" Willis didn't answer right away. "Yes." Theo nodded. "But I'm not leaving," Willis added. Theo looked down into the cup. "Good, 'cause I was thinkin' maybe, if you wanted, you could be our papa, like real." Willis stared at him. Theo didn't look up, just added, "We don't care about papers or blood or townspeople, we care about you, and Mara, and Bane's safe." Willis swallowed hard, then pulled the boy close. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, his arms weren't empty. And for the first time in his life, Theo felt like he had someone to run to, not away from. In the corner of the cabin, Ruthie stood. She watched it all with quiet eyes, then nodded once and turned away. Her work here was done. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtain like forgiveness. Willis stood by the window with a tin cup of bitter coffee that had long gone cold, but he hadn't moved. His eyes were fixed on the tree line. Not out of fear, not anymore, but out of resolve. Inside the cabin, Mara sat with her hand on Ben's chest, counting his breaths. Each one was steadier than the last. Ruthie had left before dawn without waking anyone, leaving behind 2 bundles of herbs, a scrawled note in looping cursive, and a final whispered blessing. He'll live, but not if y'all live in fear. No one said it aloud, but the next move was clear. They couldn't stay here. Not after what the sheriff had said. Not after what that paper in the preacher's hand had spelled out. The town didn't want them, and they weren't going to stop until the children were gone or Willis was buried. Theo had stayed awake most of the night, taking shifts with Jody at the window. It had been his idea to block the doors with furniture, to tie up some cans with string across the front porch. "If they come, I want to hear 'em," he said simply. The boy who once wouldn't speak unless prodded now issued quiet commands like a soldier born into it. Willis had seen war in his time, and he'd seen children made into men far too early. But Theo, this boy was different, hardened by life but not yet bitter, still capable of loving, of choosing loyalty over fear. That was something Willis hadn't seen in a long time. He stepped back from the window and looked to Mara. She was watching him. "They'll come back, won't they?" "Yes," he said. "With papers or with fire, they're not finished." Her voice broke. "Then what do we do?" "We leave." She nodded slowly, the way a woman does when every other road's already been traveled. That night, while the boys helped pack what little they had into sacks and canvas, Willis led Mara out back and showed her something he'd been preparing. A wagon. Not much to look at. 2 wheels squeaked and the boards were splintered, but it would hold. "We'll head north," he said, "to Ridge Hollow. It's small, tucked up behind the mesa. Folks there keep to themselves. No sheriff. No church that decides who's family and who ain't." She touched the side of the wagon. "You've thought about this?" "Since the day I found them eating rotten apples by the barn." That night, Mara tucked Ben in clothes and lay beside him on the pallet, whispering stories in his ear about places far away where the trees never stopped blooming and no one ever went hungry. The baby didn't understand the words, but her voice calmed him, and when his tiny hand reached up to grip her collarbone, she cried silently beside him. Willis sat out on the porch. Theo joined him. They said nothing for a while. Then Theo asked, "Did you always want a son?" Willis didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I wanted a family for a long time. My wife, we tried. She blamed herself. I blamed God. Then she died and I didn't blame anybody, just stopped hoping." Theo looked down at his hands. "You blame us now." Willis shook his head. "No, I thank God for you." The boy blinked hard and looked away. "We were just kids." "You still are." "No," Theo said softly. "We had to grow up fast. But now I want to learn to be a boy again. You'll teach me." Willis smiled. "I'll try." They left at first light. Willis hitched the old mule to the wagon and hoisted the bundles inside. Jody climbed in beside Ben, cradling his head while Mara settled beside them with blankets. Theo chose to ride up front beside Willis. He wouldn't say it aloud, but he liked seeing where they were going. The wind was brisk but not cruel. Dust rose behind the wheels as they left the cabin behind. No one looked back. Not even once. They made it 2 days out before the trail forked near Gallows Ridge. It was Myra who noticed the rider first. Far back, too far to see the face but close enough to follow. "They found us," she whispered. Willis pulled the reins. "Myra, get the boys down behind the ridge. Hide. I'll ride out and cut him off." "No," she said. "There's no time to argue." She hesitated, then obeyed. Theo tried to follow Willis, but the man placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Stay with your mama." Then he rode. The rider came fast, but as they neared the bend he slowed, pulled up. Willis rode up to meet him, hand resting on the rifle at his side. The rider wasn't the sheriff. It was Eli, the blacksmith's boy. Eli looked different out here, less sure, less proud. He raised both hands. "Don't shoot, I ain't here for them kids." Willis narrowed his eyes. "Then why follow?" Eli took a breath. "Sheriff's common, brought 5 more men with him, said they'd find you 'fore sundown, but I heard what they were planning, said they'd burn your wagon if you didn't hand the kids over." Willis said nothing. "I came to warn you." "Why?" Eli shrugged. "Because my ma used to beat me, and when I ran nobody came looking. I don't reckon those boys did nothing wrong, and I seen you carry that baby like he was yours." Willis studied the young man. "Thank you." Eli turned his horse. "Cut through Widow's Pass. Sheriff won't follow that trail, too narrow, too steep." Then he was gone. Willis rode back fast. Theo met him halfway. "What happened?" "We changed course." Widow's Pass was as treacherous as Eli had warned. But they made it, barely. The wagon nearly overturned twice. Ben cried until he fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. Jody kept whispering to him, "We're almost there, baby brother. Papa's got us. He won't let us fall." That night they camped under a lean-to made of branches and canvas. Willis didn't sleep. Neither did Mara. They sat on opposite sides of the small fire, their eyes meeting across the glow. She said, "I was married once." He waited. "He left when Ben was born, said I was too much to carry. That 4 mouths were too many. I used to pray he'd come back just so I wouldn't be alone. Now I thank God he didn't." Willis swallowed. "I'm glad too." They didn't say anything more, but something passed between them in that silence, something honest. By the 4th day, they reached Ridge Hollow. It wasn't a town exactly, more like a loose gathering of cabins between the cliffs and the river bend, a handful of families, a general store run out of an old mining office. No lawman, no preacher, just people, quiet people, the kind who nodded but didn't pry. Willis asked the storekeeper, an old woman named Clara, if anyone needed help building or clearing land. She said, "You got hands." He pointed to the boys. She nodded, "We got work." That night they slept in an old hay barn Clara offered them. The wind howled outside, but inside they were warm, safe. Theo climbed into the hay beside Willis. "Think they'll come looking for us?" "Maybe." "Will you protect us?" Willis turned, looked into the boy's eyes. "With everything I have." Theo nodded, then said softly, "Night, Papa." Willis didn't correct him. Didn't blink. Just pulled the boy close and held on. The next morning, Mara stepped outside and saw the sun break over the ridge. Jody came running up with wildflowers he'd picked from the stream bed. "For Mama," he said, beaming. She took them, kissed the top of his head, and looked out across the meadow. Behind her, Willis stepped out, lifting Ben in his arms. The baby cooed. And for the first time, Mara said it out loud. "We're home." The wind in Ridge Hollow never howled quite like it did across the plains. It sighed, instead, soft and slow, like it had nothing to prove. That morning, it whispered through the grass outside Clara's barn, curling gently around the wooden boards like it knew something the world had forgotten. Inside, Willis stirred before the sun had finished rising. He sat up, not out of habit or duty, but because a small body was curled against him and breathing steady, and another not far off muttered in his sleep, dreaming of something that made him smile. He stepped carefully around them. Theo had stretched out long and wide, a protective arm tossed over Ben. Jody had curled into a pile of blankets near the barn door, and Mara, she was closest to the hearth they'd built of stones and clay, her arm resting protectively across her chest as though shielding the children even in her sleep. Willis paused, watched her. Her hair had loosened from its usual knot. A soft curl lay across her cheek. She looked younger in the firelight, not weak, just peaceful, and peace was something she had rarely known. He stepped outside into the dawn. The ridge behind the town was glowing with orange fire, the kind that didn't burn but rose quietly into the sky. He took a long breath and tried to believe it, that this was theirs now, this quiet patch of earth, these quiet mornings. Later that day, Clara gave them an old shed on her property. It had once been used for tool storage, but she said with a shrug, "A roof's a roof. Gut it, clean it, make it yours." And they did. Together. Willis and Theo cleared the floor while Jody helped Mara hang linens across the broken windows. Clara lent them nails and a hammer, and by evening it wasn't much, but it was home, for now. No one said it, but they all felt it. The danger wasn't gone. Ridge Hollow was peaceful, but rumors spread like dust. Someone would eventually come looking. And so every afternoon Willis took Theo with him into the woods. They'd practice with the old rifle, then go trapping. Theo learned to track birds, read scat, listen for warnings in the trees. Jody would beg to join, and eventually Willis agreed, showing him how to string up fishing line along the creek. Jody was still young, still unsteady, but determined. Back at the shed, Mara cooked. She used what little they had and made it stretch, some potatoes, a tin of salt, river greens, and on rare nights, smoked rabbit Willis brought back. And Ben, he was growing stronger. Each day his cries had more volume. He began sitting up on his own, and when Mara held him on her lap, he'd reach for Theo and gurgle with a grin. The first time Ben laughed, they all froze. Then they laughed with him. Mara covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. He hasn't laughed since. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. They all understood. 2 weeks passed like that. Then one evening, as the sky turned gray and the ridge's shadow stretched across the shed, Clara appeared with her apron still on and her face drawn tight. "Willis," she said softly, "you'd best come." He didn't ask why. He followed her through town to the old post shed behind the store. A man stood there, not a sheriff, not a lawman, but close enough. Long duster, black boots, and a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Name's Griffin," the man said when Willis approached. "Heard you been talkin' in folks who ain't yours." Willis crossed his arms. "I take in who I please." Griffin smirked. "That's your right, but I work for some people who disagree." "What people?" "The ones who say them kids you're shelterin' belong to the town back east. Say their mama signed papers before she died." Willis narrowed his eyes. "There's no papers, no mark, no nothing. They were abandoned." "That ain't how the story reads on my end." "Well, I was there. I saw them with my own eyes eating rot off the dirt. No one claimed 'em then." Griffin leaned close. "I don't care who raised them. I care who owns them now, and the name on the claim ain't yours." Willis' voice turned cold. "I don't own them, I love them." Griffin tipped his hat. "That's mighty poetic, but love don't hold in court. They're coming, you know, the men with the real papers, the ones who ain't so friendly as me." Then he left. Willis didn't sleep that night. He sat outside the shed, rifle across his knees. Mara joined him before dawn. She didn't ask what the man said. She saw it in his face. "They're coming." He nodded. "What do we do?" He looked at her, then at the shed behind them where the children slept. "We stand together." Mara slid her hand into his. They came at midday. 3 men on horseback, no badges, no mercy. Willis stood at the edge of the yard, rifle slung across his chest. Theo beside him with a hunting knife tucked in his belt. Mara kept the younger boys inside. She held Ben tight to her chest and sang softly to drown out the sound of the approaching hooves. The leader was a thin man with sharp cheekbones and a legal document in his hand. He waved it like a sword. By love. And it was stronger than any paper, louder than any lie, and more lasting than the past that tried to follow them. They had a home now, and no one would take it from them again.